Did you know that the secret to heart health might actually lie in your gut? Dive in with us today as we explore the surprising connections between your heart health, gut, immune system, and hormones. Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. Today we're going to talk about something that might surprise you. We're going to talk about the relationship between your heart health and your digestive tract. And you heard that right. Not a lot of people have ever considered that connection, but your heart and your cardiovascular system is closely tied to what's happening in your digestive system. And this is all connected to the immune responses that can start to occur and hormonal imbalances that follow when you have problems with your gut. So let's unravel this fascinating connection together. So here are some of the most important things that I want you to take away from this discussion today. First of all, an unhealthy digestive tract can lead to increased levels of certain harmful substances entering the bloodstream. And these substances can cause inflammation, and they can damage blood vessels, and this can lead to heart disease. And more importantly, a compromised gut affects nutrient absorption, which can indirectly impact heart health, and it can drive an immune response. Now, if your gut is unhealthy, like what does that actually mean? And there are really several different facets of gut health that could be compromised. And really the first thing that I'd like to focus on is the role of the gut bacteria that are in our digestive tract that we have this symbiotic relationship with, and how they can influence heart health. And if you didn't know this, a lot of people are aware that our gut is full of bacteria, but we have trillions of bacteria in our digestive tract. Literally pounds of bacteria in our gut. And they play a really important role in our overall health. And so when you have a healthy gut microbiome, these bacteria, they help to regulate inflammation. They produce many different vitamins and nutrients. They help to manage cholesterol levels. And if this is out of balance, it can lead to increased inflammation, higher cholesterol, and other heart disease risk factors. So one of the things that you can see occur if the bacteria are out of balance, one thing that has been theorized, and it appears to be significantly associated with heart disease, is a substance called TMAO. And TMAO is produced by certain gut bacteria. And when we consume foods that are rich in choline, like red meats, certain gut bacteria can convert it into TMAO, and elevated TMAO levels have been linked to an increased risk of heart disease. Now, I want to be real clear that some of this stuff is I don't think the science is settled on it. So, for example, I am always open to learning new information and trying to better understand the reality of the situation. So when we're talking about TMAO, for example, or dietary strategies or heart health, I'm always open to the idea that the theoretical models and theories that I believe are most likely to be true may not be true. So I'm willing to change my mind, especially based on new evidence. And I try not to be too certain or overly confident in one direction or the other, to overcommit in what I think to be true, because I think that's a you always want to be open to new information and to changing your mind, and you want to be able to admit that something that you believe to be true, or that you thought was the most significant perspective or the right perspective on a topic might be wrong. And so I always like to be able to say, look, I'm open to learning things. I always want to see and understand the truth. I'm not as tied. I don't want to be tied to a particular belief. I just want to say, look, what is true, and there's going to be nuance to this. So the TMAO argument is definitely debatable. So one of the things that I have an appreciation for, and I love, and one of the most powerful things we can do for our health is to control our diet. Okay, so first of all, that's a really important lever that you can pull to help modulate health and even states of disease. So, I'm always kind of looking at new dietary trends and trying to understand, has someone discovered something, or is there some tool that we might be able to utilize to help people with their health? Because, primarily I work with people that have autoimmunity, and in autoimmune disease cases, a lot of times we'll use dietary strategies to try to remove immunological triggers that are commonly found in foods, and then we'll look for pathogens that might be triggering the immune response on a chronic basis, driving the autoimmune process, and then we'll look at chemicals. We'll look at the vitamin and mineral status. We will look at gut lining health, which is one of the things we're going to talk about here, and we'll do everything that we can from a dietary perspective, a lifestyle perspective, often using temporary supplementation as well to support these physiological issues that we're seeing to optimize the health and try to dampen the autoimmune process, and if we're lucky, put it into remission. And so I lean on what I see working clinically a lot and what I've learned, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other things that can work just as well or maybe even better. So I'm always open to questioning, my current thought processes and strategies. So the TMAO argument is an important one, but I will say this: there are a lot of people that have been utilizing a carnivore diet, which is an all-meat diet, and it has been a really effective way for some people with autoimmunity to dampen their autoimmunity and really have significantly better health. And, so as I just mentioned, consuming foods that are higher in choline, which is really important for your brain to make acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that's responsible for cognition and memory and focus, which is critical. You got to have it. If you are consuming red meat, then theoretically you would think, oh wow, well someone might have really high TMAO, and that could lead to heart disease. And potentially. But what I think you can't just look at one of these biomarkers I'm going to talk about in isolation. You cannot do that. So if you look at a lot of the carnivore community, there are some people that have been eating carnivore for many, many years. They have had all kinds of cardiovascular testing done, and they're in fantastic cardiovascular shape. So you would think, well, this is not the only factor. And I'm not sure if they've had TMAO checked, but you would have to look, even if their TMAO was high, and if they don't have cardiovascular disease, and if they've been doing this for 10 years or 5 years or however long, then why don't they have heart disease if TMAO is such a significant factor? Okay, so what it comes down to is TMAO may indeed be a risk factor, but maybe it's in the presence of other things like higher insulin or higher inflammatory levels, and maybe that individual is exercising and they have a protective effect through increasing blood flow and their nitric oxide levels with exercise. Maybe so who knows, right? I mean, you can't say that one thing is going to be a significant factor for everyone because we're all individuals. But it does look like TMAO is a contributing factor to heart disease, and so I want to just go ahead and qualify this and make sure that you understand that don't take everything literally. You want to look at it as a potential factor that could contribute to a problem, but everyone has their own mix of physiological influences, these external environmental factors that's changing their physiology, their physiology, their terrain, their gut health, their everything, their individual, their immune system status, whether they have high inflammation, their hormonal status, all of these things, their lifestyle, these all have significant influences on their expression of disease or health. So it's not just one thing. But I do want to mention TMAO. This is something that has been associated with heart disease. I do think it's something to be concerned about, but you want to look at the person as a whole. Okay, so I want to qualify that because sometimes people push back pretty hard on some of the things I say, and I'm like, look, I'm not saying. If you take one thing out of the entire conversation literally and say this one thing you said, no, you are an individual. Everyone has these individual factors that are contributing. So you might want to consider this thing, as I would if I was working with someone, as a potential driver of a process that could be, resulting in a negative health outcome like cardiovascular disease. But if you're doing great, and maybe if you have other lifestyle factors and other influences that are negating this or neutralizing it, or it becomes a non-factor, well then that's awesome. That's great. But so this is where you don't get too hung up on the individual markers like TMAO. You want to look at it. I think, in my opinion, you want to look at this and consider if these levels are high. And of course, you want to know your cardiovascular disease status. So if you're someone with cardiovascular disease, then I would say, that would probably be a pretty significant factor I would be looking at. I would be looking at inflammatory markers, which we're going to talk about some of these things in just a second. So I'll get off my soapbox on that one, but I think it's an important topic. So TMAO can be made by certain bacteria. Unfavorable bacteria in the gut can make higher levels. And so in my opinion, I eat quite a bit of animal-based protein because it's a great source of protein. And quite frankly, most of the people that I work with that are autoimmune, they're not getting enough protein. So they can't they can't make enzymes, they can't repair their tissues, their immune system doesn't have what it needs. The body cannot repair and function optimally when you are deficient in protein. So I eat, quite a bit of animal-based proteins. I think it's bioavailable, and that's not a judgment call on anyone. If you want to eat a different way, I support you, but I also want you to know that I've worked with a lot of people that have followed different dietary patterns, and it is a big issue for a lot of people to get sufficient protein. And that's my opinion, and that's what I've seen clinically, and I've seen what works clinically. So you can have theoretical models that you believe in and that you believe to be true, and then I'll have the approach that I've seen work clinically for me. Not that it's going to work for everyone, but I know that a lot of people are deficient in protein. Okay, that's a big issue. So animal-based protein is very nutrient dense. It's bioavailable, and it tends to be a great way to get those recommendations and those requirements in. So it's something that you want to keep in mind. Look at TMAO, but definitely you need to get enough protein as well. So that's an issue if your gut bacteria are out of balance. TMAO levels could go up, and then that could be a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Of course, everyone's an individual. The next thing to consider here, and this is a really important one that I think is overlooked almost 100% of the time. I've never seen anyone that I've worked with that a primary care physician or a cardiologist has ever looked at. And this is not a knock on them. They serve a purpose. They do, they are really busy with a lot of sick people, and this is beyond what their conventional training is in. And until quite frankly, until these things are covered by insurance, none of them are going to do it. That's one of the reasons. And this is not a knock on them. It's not like they're not even aware of this. And so, just to be clear, they serve all of our specialists and doctors. My opinion and the way that I approach the world is that everyone's trying to help you. And so, I don't like bashing other people at all, because I think that's not productive and it's just not a good way to live. One of the things that's really critical here that's a connection to the gut is something called is to look at something in the blood, and primarily you check this through an antibody test called lipopolysaccharides, and this is a real significant culprit to a very strong inflammatory response. And what it is a lipopolysaccharides, often abbreviated as LPS. This is a component of the outer membrane of certain bacteria. And when someone has a leaky gut, when their intestinal lining is inflamed or broken down, their mucus layers are thinned or deficient, and what happens is the the bacteria that live in our gut, some of them are gram positive, some of them are gram negative, and this is the way that they're classified based on different characteristics. And some of the gram negative bacteria, well, all the bacteria in the gut, they turn over, they multiply, they go through their life cycle, they die, and when they die, they fragment, and then they're carried out in your stool. But as they fragment into their smaller pieces and they die off, the gram-negative bacteria, some of them have this LPS, lipopolysaccharide, in their outer wall, in their outer membrane. And when there's a leaky gut, when the intestinal lining is hyperpermeable and is inflamed, LPS can enter the bloodstream through this leaky gut or this hyperpermeable gut wall. And when they pass through into the bloodstream, they trigger a very strong inflammatory response. And when you have, one of the most important things to consider with heart disease is what is the person's level of inflammation, because this is a primary driver of heart disease. So you want to look at, in my opinion, you want to look at lipopolysaccharide antibodies. You want to check classical inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, homocysteine. You can do a sedimentation rate. You can look at inflammatory biomarkers, but definitely understanding if someone has LPS reactivity, that's important. And it's not just from the gut. These bacteria live in other places, and one area of concern is the mouth. If you have inflamed gums, the bacteria that live in that can take hold and live in the pockets of your gums, between the tooth and between your gums, those bacteria have been shown to be found throughout the body. So that is a barrier system. So anywhere you have a mucous membrane, so mouth, starting in your mouth, going all the way through your body, your sinuses, your lungs, everywhere you have a hollow space, and quite frankly, your skin. Your skin is a selectively permeable barrier system as well. If it is compromised, and let's stay with the mouth, if you have these bacteria in your mouth and you have bleeding gums, you have a leaky oral barrier or leaky gums, which is letting these bacteria, and as they die off, these lipopolysaccharides into circulation. So this is a really important thing to consider as well. So these things can trigger an inflammatory response and absolutely could contribute to heart disease. So another thing that you would want to consider checking, but this happens in the gut too. And just to kind of keep it simple, let's just talk about them in the context of the GI tract, where you can commonly find these things coming in. But if you find LPS antibodies in the bloodstream, it doesn't necessarily always correlate with the gut. That's why you would want to have some other biomarkers of the gut if possible. Looking at symptoms too. If someone's symptomatic, they have GI symptoms, pretty good idea that the lipopolysaccharides are coming in through the intestinal tract. But if they're oral health, if someone's gums bleed and whatnot when they floss, if they have gum recession, good chance that there's a problem there. And there are tests that you can do now where you swab the inside of the mouth and send it off, and they can do a DNA analysis of the bacteria that was found in the oral cavity. So I think there's some real promising ways to better work up and understand what's happening orally. And there are absolutely ways to work on supporting a more optimal oral microbiome with different types of brushing and tongue scraping and oil pulling and various herbal blends that you can use in like water picks or through different oral care routines. So lipopolysaccharides, really important too. Another thing are bacteria. If you have an imbalance, staying with the gut microbiome and the gut health, if you have an imbalance in gut bacteria and you have certain types of gut bacteria, you can have an increase in the production of an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. Okay, so if you hear ACE on the end of a word, it's typically an enzyme. So beta-glucuronidase. So ACE is at the end there. And so what this enzyme does is it can interfere with a process called glucuronidation. It's one of the liver's biotransformation pathways. It's a chemical process where our body tags various toxins and hormones. As the hormones, all of our hormones get broken down through the liver. They are not water soluble. So they get made water soluble so you can eliminate them through your sweat, feces, and through your urine. And this happens through these liver, you can refer to them as a detoxification pathway, but it's technically a biotransformation pathway. And like estrogens, this helps with elimination of estrogens and some of these other compounds. And when these enzymes are high, they can untag, they can kind of break this bond. You could say untagging these substances, leading to their reabsorption. And this process is known as autointoxication. And this can lead to a reabsorption in the intestinal tract of estrogens and various compounds that have gone through the liver and have been bound to make them water soluble. They've got a chemical reaction that's occurred that's making them water soluble. And if that bond is broken, they can be reabsorbed, which can, it's been linked to various health issues and may contribute also to heart disease. So your microbiome is really it's a very important symbiotic relationship with your systemic health. Another thing that we want to talk about in the context of heart health, cardiovascular health, and the gut is bile flow and cholesterol. I mean, when you talk about heart health, cholesterol comes up a lot. And bile plays a really important role in digesting fats and helping with eliminating excessive cholesterol. And if you have poor flow of bile, it can lead to some issues with cholesterol. And so it binds, your bile also has some really important actions that it performs on your fat, for example. When it comes into your digestive tract, your bile helps to emulsify or break down fat so it can be absorbed through the intestinal lining. If you don't have good bile flow, a lot of people, if they don't absorb fats well, they'll have like a lot of fat in their stool. You'll see like a sheen of fat or oil floating on top of the toilet after you have a bowel movement, and that can be a sign of poor bile function and maybe not enough bile. You'll commonly see that occur. But bile can bind to various chemicals and toxins and help with their elimination. And so if you don't have proper bile flow, all of these things can build up and they could be reabsorbed again, contributing to inflammation and potentially heart disease. So one of the things that's important with the gut is having a normal transit time, getting things out. You don't want these bacteria and things to sit in the gut for a long period of time and have the potential to have a significant bacterial overgrowth and then even irritating the gut lining and reabsorbing. So I think that a good transit time for normal bowel movements is typically, one a day. So I think that this kind of highlights a lot of the potential factors with the gut. The importance of a healthy gut lining is important. It acts as a barrier, and it allows, when it's functioning properly, it allows beneficial nutrients to pass through while keeping out all the bad stuff, all the harmful substances. And when it's broken down or compromised, it can allow various toxins and bacterial fragments and undigested food particles that enter the bloodstream, triggering inflammation. And that inflammation could absolutely be a significant contributing factor to heart disease risk. Okay, so now let's talk about what you can actually consider doing. And as always, with all the information I share in the podcast and everywhere else on social media, this is not medical advice. This is informational in nature. Make sure that you check with your doctor before implementing anything that I mention here. So first of all, you want to consider a holistic approach. And I mean, holistic is kind of overutilized, but you want to consider what I would call a systems biology approach. You want to consider all of the systems of the body. And this is really where, when I work with people from a functional medicine perspective, instead of just like looking at the symptoms, we try to understand root causing mechanisms of their problem. And so to do this and to get a better understanding of where the problems might lie that are driving the, let's say, heart disease or the process that the person's dealing with, the autoimmunity, for example, it involves as comprehensive of an overview of the person's diet, lifestyle, and these factors that might drive this process as possible. So rather than trying to just narrow down, in an appointment, information that's shared, we want to gather as much information as we can initially, and then try to review that information, and then in the appointment try to focus in on areas where we might be able to make some changes or improvements to optimize the health outcome. And this is really, you have to consider if you have heart disease or an autoimmune condition or any state of disease, you have to understand that it's your genetics plus your environmental exposure. Okay, and then it's also your terrain, meaning the health of your body. So there are things, and the things that you can change are the environmental inputs and your terrain, the health of your body. You can't change your genes, but you can absolutely pull on and modulate, use some of these lifestyle and and health factors to change the expression of your disease state. Now, diet and exercise are really three key pillars that we want to look at when we're considering heart health, and really anybody that I work with, I'm looking at those three factors: diet, exercise, and lifestyle. And really, exercise I consider as part of lifestyle. So it's really diet and lifestyle. And we'll often use some temporary nutritional supplementation, maybe long-term supplementation, but really you want to try to only use it, in my opinion, initially to try and support regaining health as much as possible. And then you want to taper off of that as much as you can. So those are things that you want to absolutely consider when you're trying to improve any kind of health condition. From a dietary perspective, what I see that commonly works is adopting what you might want to call as an anti-inflammatory diet. And this means really cutting out processed foods, sugars, unhealthy fats like a lot of seed oils, high omega-3 oils. Those are not good for you. Focusing on whole foods, that's a key thing. Foods that have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids in them can be helpful. So, a lot of different types of fish have high omega-3s. There are plant-based sources of omega-3s that are a little bit different, but still omega-3s. You want to focus on foods that have high levels of naturally occurring antioxidants and fiber. The fiber, remember, all these things, they help to influence your immune response. They help to nurture and grow a favorable gut microbiome. And so things like fish, berries, nuts, and a lot of times greens, though stems and leaves of plants, I'm starting to look at those with more, as something that we might want to, keep our eye on as far as research goes, because of the plant defense chemicals and the potential for them to create some issues in our health with eating them on a very regular basis. Now, I eat green vegetables. I mean, I like Brussels sprouts and a lot of things, but there are plant defense chemicals in the stems and leaves of plants and even the roots that it's debatable, but they might actually not be ideal for human health. Now, fruit has less of these. And if you cook and, you like slow cook or pressure cook or cook with any kind of heat, stems and leaves of plants, you break down a lot of these chemicals, and they do have a good amount of fiber. But, I really like looking at fruits that have high fiber in them, especially like the stone fruits like peaches, plums, nectarines, and even pears can be really good because they have such high fiber content that you don't have massive spikes or swings in blood sugar. And really from fruit in general, unless you're like processing it significantly, you're not going to have major surges in blood sugar unless you have some real significant insulin resistance. And then you really have to look at why that's occurring too. So, in general, foods like fatty fish, berries, and nuts I love, and then vegetables are good too, but I like them to be cooked and broken down a bit more so that some of those plant defense chemicals are minimized. Now, engaging in regular exercise can definitely have a helpful protective benefit because you're stimulating blood flow. And when you do that, you stimulate endothelial nitric oxide, which is really helpful at helping the arteries to be healthy. And you want to shoot for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity at a minimum per week, at minimum. You really want to go significantly higher than that if you can, but things like brisk walking, swimming, cycling are good. Lower impact things are really helpful. Now, if you are physically able to do it, you can do more vigorous and more impactful types of exercise if your joints can tolerate it and you're physically able to do that. But I don't want to neglect to mention that strength training, lifting weights, or doing body weight exercises at least 2 times a week is really helpful too. These are all things that are powerful signals to our body, to our cardiovascular system by increasing blood flow that can be really helpful at decreasing inflammation and keeping our cardiovascular system healthy. So it can be, and it should be, a really important cornerstone of cardiovascular health. Now, there's some other things here that you might not consider that I think are very important. Like, for one thing, another lifestyle factor, prioritizing sleep and prioritizing self-care and stress management. And really, when it comes to sleep, you want to shoot for 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. You want to incorporate stress-reducing practices like meditation, deep breathing, and even yoga into your routine. And I also recommend using biometrics tracking devices to track your sleep. I like any watch that will track oxygen saturation, but I like Garmin watches if you're okay wearing them at night. And then there are various rings that you can get that are smart rings, like the Aura ring. There's one called Ring Con. There's several different rings that are coming out on the market today, but as long as they'll track oxygen saturation and your stages of sleep, that's perfect. And then probably the most effective and easiest thing to use would be like a Sleep Cycle app. Sleep Cycle is an application you can download on any smartphone, and you start it each night before you go to bed and just put it on your nightstand. And if you're snoring, talking, if you're getting up, if you're making any noises, it will measure like the ambient background noise levels, the light levels. It will give you all kinds of great information and give you a sleep score. When you wake up, you just swipe it off and it will, that indicates that you woke up, and that gives you a really significant way to track things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to, especially sound. A lot of people are snoring, and I've talked about this a lot in other podcasts too, but if you're snoring or you have sleep disturbances, that is a major, major problem, and you need to address it immediately. It's like one of the most important things you can do. So sleep optimization is often completely neglected, and so many people snore or have problems at night breathing. They wake up absolutely exhausted, and there can be a lot of reasons for waking up exhausted, but one of the most common is they just are not sleeping well. And whatever is causing that, you need to figure it out. Okay, another thing to really remember here and keep in mind is that everybody's unique, right? I talked about this with the TMAO discussion that they talked about earlier, and what works for one person is not going to work necessarily for another, and that's why it's really essential to understand you and how your body responds to different interventions. So some of the things that I recommend you can do, and this is not necessarily something you have to do forever, but it's a really important and good thing to do for a period of time, especially if you're just trying to figure out how to optimize your health, how to help you be as healthy as possible if you're dealing with a disease process. These are all things that help you to gather information so you can make better decisions, okay? Number one, keep a journal. So if you track your food intake, your exercise routine, your sleep patterns, and then how you feel each day, then over time you're going to be able to notice patterns and understand what works best for you. So I can't emphasize that enough. Now, another thing is people ask me a lot about nutritional supplements, and you do want to consider supplementation, but you really want to find out what you need rather than just taking a bunch of random things, because I've worked with a lot of people who are taking a ton of supplements and they don't need them. But supplementation can be really helpful. And some things for cardiovascular health that I've seen to be really helpful is, I would say, again, get a health assessment, work with someone to get a health assessment first. But supplements like omega-3 fatty acids, like fish oils, can be really helpful. CoQ10 can be helpful for heart health and cardiovascular function, and magnesium are probably some of what I would call like the lowest hanging fruit, the things that can make the biggest difference if they're the only things that you take. And magnesium's so critical for so many different physiological functions. It's just unbelievable. I mean, it's like 300 plus biochemical reactions require magnesium. So if you don't have it, or if you're deficient, you're going to have some issues. Okay, so another thing that I would consider is regularly trying to support optimal detoxification. And what I mean by that is doing things that help your body to support its natural detoxification processes. And this could be stuff like, an infrared sauna that helps you to sweat because you can eliminate so many things through your sweat. You could do just drinking more water. I mean, that's a good way too. A lot of people are dehydrated, and drinking more water is a very simple thing that you can do. And you don't want to drink so much water that you flush out all your electrolytes, but you want to drink enough water each day so that you're urinating regularly and you're able to help flush things out. Because I mean, if with toxicity, you remember this saying, the solution to pollution is dilution. Okay, so diluting it out is a great way to help clear things from the body. And even consuming enough fiber. Like the fiber, I keep mentioning that is because if you can have, fiber helps to give bulk to your stool, but one of the other things that it can do is it can help to carry out a lot of those things that we've talked about earlier. The bile and everything helps to transport it out. And regular bowel movements are important so that you don't have stool sitting in your intestinal tract for a prolonged period of time, growing, maybe unfavorable bacteria, and having more of a chance of, reabsorbing some things through the gut lining. So those are all good things to keep in mind as well. So just stay informed, be proactive, and if you can, get a regular checkup and work with someone to help you formulate, get a good starting point. And if you can, work with a functional medicine practitioner so that they can help you look at this, in a complementary way to what your medical physician's doing, to help give you, a strategy to try and optimize your health, not just keep you from getting worse, but to actually help you get better as much as possible. So if you can do those things, I think that it's going to go a long way towards supporting better cardiovascular health. If you found this episode helpful, please share and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. You can join our Facebook group, the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group with over 11,000 members, and you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brad Shook. And remember, together, we can make a difference. Remember, every part of our body is interconnected, and understanding these connections is the key to true well-being and optimal health. So keep listening, keep learning, and let's continue this journey to better health together. Until next time, have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.